Good evening. I'm Father Alexander, and this is step 89 of our walking tour through the Bible. And we're in the first book of Samuel at chapter 18. And we're entering into one of the most enduringly famous stories in the Bible, the story of David and Jonathan. The story of David and Jonathan goes over several chapters, so I just want to sketch out its main import. David and Jonathan meet up, and we're told that Jonathan, who is presumably slightly older than David, but not much older, Jonathan loved David like his very self. This is right at the beginning of chapter 18, gives him several very important gifts: his clothes, his cloak, his sword, his belt, and so on, his armor. So what we have between David and Jonathan is a very fast friendship between two warriors, a bit like Achilles and Patroclus in the Iliad, and also a bit like Nisus and Euryalus in the second part of the Aeneid, and a bit like Aeneas and Achates in the first part of the Aeneid. It's usual in ancient literature to portray warriors as being closely attached to each other, and of course following the path of war making together. Well, one of the things that's interesting, though, is this. It says Jonathan felt an instant affection for David. Okay, fine. Jonathan made a pact with David since he loved him like his very self. Now, that word pact, covenant, is a constant sort of word that we find again and again in the Old Testament. One of the things we don't find is that marriage being described as a covenant. Women are given in marriage, just as you give property away, a man gives a woman to another man to be his wife. The only example I can think of a pact between two people, a personal pact, is between Ruth and Naomi. And Ruth makes a vow to Naomi saying, wherever you go, I'll go too, which is very similar to the covenant formula between God and Israel. So this friendship between David and Jonathan is formalized by a pact. And as we'll see, Jonathan keeps his side of the bargain and David keeps his side of the bargain. Neither of them actually breaks this pact, even though circumstances are very much against them. Now, marriage and friendship in Christian thinking are distinct. Marriage is for life. Once you enter into marriage, you can never unmarry. You can't get divorced. Well, you can go to a court and get a divorce recognized by the state, but you're always going to be tied to that person forever. Marriage represents a one-way street. The only thing that can dissolve a marriage is death. Once you enter into marriage with somebody, there's no getting out of it. You can't keep on going on marrying other people, sort of serial marriage. That's simply not on, because it's so serious, so important, it can only really be done once in the lifetime of the spouses. But friendship actually is rather different, because you can become friends with several people at the same time. You can become firm and fast friends with one person at a certain time, but you can walk away from the friendship and you don't commit any sin. In other words, circumstances change and friendships wither and decay. And therefore, if you say, oh, well, weren't you such great friends with so-and-so? Yes, we were great friends at university. We haven't seen each other for years. And then, of course, you might see each other again and rekindle your friendship. The other thing about friendship is that while marriage is about mutual self-giving, and we talk of marriage as a covenant, friendship is actually not really mutual self-giving, but taking profit from association with another person. Aristotle said, you choose your friends because they're useful to you. And actually, that's not really such a bad thing. We choose our friends, people who we find their company enjoyable. We find the association profitable. And I don't just mean materially profitable, but spiritually profitable. But there is profit in friendship. Now, you can't really say you get married for profit. You do enter into friendship for profit. It's a way of bettering yourself, bettering your mind, bettering your social standing, bettering your moral and physical standing. It's relaxing to have friends. Nobody chooses friends who they don't like. You choose friends you like, and it's a sort of an indulgence which you allow each other. And it's okay to have friends. Between David and Jonathan, this is obviously going to be deeply profitable for David to be noticed in this way by the son of the king. And it's also going to be deeply profitable for Jonathan because he's going to have somebody who is going to tell him what many people wouldn't be able to tell the son of the king. One of the saddest things one hears about members of royal families is that they don't have any friends. They're just surrounded by sycophants. But Jonathan, who probably might well have been surrounded by sycophants, at least has one real friend. Now, that's friendship. But of course, you've heard of love triangles and you've heard of jealousy, and you might well have heard of love quadrilaterals. Well, you probably haven't. I've just invented the phrase. We've got 4 people in this relationship and it's not working. First of all, Jonathan has a sister. He has 2 sisters, Merab and Michal, and Saul decides to marry David off to one of these 2 girls. First of all, he dangles Merab in front of him, but then gives her to somebody else. Then he dangles Michal in front of him because Michal's in love with David. Then they marry, and he thinks that this will be a way of getting rid of David because he says as a bride price, he wants the foreskins of 100 Philistines, hoping that the Philistines will get rid of David for him. Because Saul is jealous of David. David is younger. David is more successful. And of course, jealousy is a completely irrational thing. Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000, sing the women rather tactlessly in the presence of in the hearing of the king. And so because of this silly song, Saul decides he cannot stand David much longer, his own son-in-law, his son's best friend, and plots to get rid of him. Moreover, Saul's mentally ill, as we know, and while David is playing his harp, Saul throws a spear at him, hoping to pin him to the wall. In other words, attempts to murder him. And this, of course, is rather shocking. And of course, this is a sign that all is not well in the court of King Saul. And Jonathan then intercedes for David. David is brought back. But then later on, David is exiled once more and flees for his life. And of course, Saul then turns against Jonathan, saying, "You're not your mother's son," or rather, he says, "You are the proof that your mother played me false. You're not my son because you are taking sides with David against your own father, so you can't be my son." And then he points out to Jonathan, "Don't you realize that David is your rival because he now has everything except the throne?" Now that comes much later. One person who doesn't get a look in this love triangle is the 4th person, and that is Michal, the one who loves David and saves his life. When Saul is trying to have David murdered, Michal says he's asleep in bed and dresses up this dummy with goat's tresses for hair, and the people come in to look at it and find that it's not David in the bed. After all, David has fled. Well, it's a good story. It's one of the earliest human interest stories in the Bible, because this story, you really do get the sense of these people as characters. Saul is madly jealous. Saul is so jealous he's unhinged. Maybe he was unhinged and that's why he acts out this terrible jealousy. Maybe Saul is just plain mad. Maybe Saul is a man who is falling apart mentally, and that's why, and it shows in the jealousy rather than the jealousy has driven him mad. Maybe the jealousy is just a sign of his madness. David is a questionable character because he's clearly ambitious, and is he really devoted to Jonathan as much as Jonathan would want? Jonathan's clearly devoted to David because there's nothing in it for Jonathan. If Jonathan had any sense, he'd follow Saul's advice and break with David and connive at his murder. Because David, as Saul rightly sees, is the person who is going to bring destruction on the house of Saul. They're going to go down while David goes up. One person gets no look in whatsoever, and that is Michal. She's in love with David, she saves his life, she's clearly clever, she's probably beautiful, and she's resourceful, and she's brave. and her father upbraids her, she holds her ground. She tells a lie, but she's clearly not frightened of her father. She's prepared to take risks for David, and this avails her nothing. We don't get any idea that David cares about Michelle at all. Rather, it's a marriage of convenience. She loves him, but does he love her? Almost certainly. Well, we're not told, but probably not. So, what we have here are the beginnings of a tragedy, a family tragedy, which is actually going to go on all throughout the reign of King David. But the seeds of the family tragedy are planted here and now. Okay, we'll carry on with this tale in due course. All the best. Bye.